right, we have Janet Phelan live from Mexico to do her weekly report with us. You can find Janet for her columns that she writes. Actually, there's a lot of different places, but in particular, you can find her on the New Eastern Outlook. There is a recent story which we talked about last week. And it keeps a catalog of all the stuff that she has written, and which is nice because when these things come into a more of a mainstream attention, one can look back and say, Janet was there, several months ago. So we'd like to welcome to the show Janet Phelan, and welcome.
Well, thank you very much, James. How are you today?
All right. I'm turning this up here. I was working on stuff, and I'm trying to work on some of the more fun parts of the show production. I guess that's where I get my jollies. And so I spent a lot of time in the studio, and I love doing that. So I actually had fun today, even though to the onlooker, to the untrained eye, one might show that I had really accomplished nothing. But it's all in here. So anyway, what do you have for us today?
Talking about being a bit ahead of the curve. For a number of years now, I have been reporting on some of these very bad guardians who are doing really horrendous things to their wards, like stealing their money, depriving them of medical care, depriving them of headstones after they deprive them of medical care and the wards die. One of these very bad guardians who actually hit the front pages of the Los Angeles Times back in 2005 has had her professional fiduciary's license revoked. Now, this doesn't sound like such a big deal, maybe, until one realizes what she's actually done and how much effort it took to simply get this level of response. Melody Scott came to the attention of the public in the LA Times series, Guardians for Profit, when a family matter becomes business. And if you Google Melody Scott, you will see dozens and dozens of articles by me talking about how she basically has stolen from people and how she has apparently terminated the lives of her wards. You can Google Melody Scott plus Stevie Price and see how she treated that poor young man who was disabled by a hospital error, and as a result of the lawsuit came into $5 million, which Melody took over and spent. And you can also see how Stevie Price died, and you can come to your own decisions about who was responsible there. You can also look at the case of Elizabeth Fairbanks. Elizabeth Fairbanks was under she was under not a probate conservatorship, but the kind of conservatorship that they give to someone who is disabled rather than simply elderly. And these disability conservatorships have a lot more secrecy around them. It's almost impossible to even get court records. So I would want to thank Mary Beth Fairbanks, who was Elizabeth's daughter, for providing the medical records to substantiate that when Elizabeth Fairbanks came down with pneumonia, Melody Scott decided that she shouldn't get antibiotics, that it was time for Elizabeth Fairbanks to go to the great rec room up in the sky. Now, that was not what Elizabeth wanted, and that's not what her family wanted, but Elizabeth Fairbanks expired of the pneumonia, which could have been treatable. Lawrence Yetzer was also a younger disabled man, disabled by cerebral palsy and blindness. And when his father died suddenly, it left Lawrence Yetzer alone in the world and very vulnerable, Melody Scott took over the trust, took over the father's estate, and took over guardianship of Lawrence Yetzer, a guardianship which only lasted 5 months. The title of the article about Lawrence Yetzer is called "The Misfortune of Inheriting," and you can see where after a few months under the care of Melody Scott, that Lawrence Yetzer suddenly came down with some sort of respiratory problem. Caregiver took him to the hospital, where he was plied with medications which retard or otherwise stop a person's ability to breathe independently. Phenobarbital, a tracherium, Versed, morphine. The guy was simply put into a chemical iron lung almost. I mean, that's not the right word, but basically he was chemically rendered unable to breathe on his own. And at that point, Melody called in the chaplain, gave him last rites, and pulled him off the ventilator. Interestingly enough, there's a lot of questions raised in the article about what happened to the rest of the money. The Vandelberg estate looks like there might be questions about a couple $100,000 missing. So, and in addition, there was my own encounter with Melody Scott, and my mother's encounter with Melody Scott, which is recorded in my book Exile and documented in my book Exile. So
there seems to be a lot of stories in the website A State of Denial. Seems to have a lot of these, so that might be a one-stop shop place for someone who wants to go there and search.
Yep. A State of Denial is run by Luann Anderson out over there in Texas, and she's done really a remarkable job with her site. So, so here we are now. It's 2016, and the Professional Fiduciaries Bureau, for the second time, the bug flying around here, man, I wish it would go away. Second time, the Professional Fiduciaries Bureau, which licenses guardians and conservators in the state of California, made a challenge to Melody Scott's license, initially based on the fact that she misreported to the Bureau about her continuing education requirements. I want that to sink in. All right, here's a woman who has committed, these acts which have devastated families, and the Professional Fiduciaries Bureau was concerned that she didn't put in all her continuing education hours and didn't tell them the truth, right? So, interestingly enough, when I found out that the PFB was again making a challenge to Melody Scott's license, I contacted them and I wanted to know how many complaints they received about Melody Scott from consumers. And I found that Julia Ansell, who is now the head of the Professional Fiduciaries Bureau and formerly a guardian herself, doesn't believe that the Public Records Act applies to her. And she wouldn't answer.
Oh, she's special.
She wouldn't answer. Now, I know that there were a number of complaints because when there was the first challenge to Melody Scott's license, I was in touch with a number of people who had sent me their complaints. So I knew there was a bunch of them. But Julia Ansell doesn't believe that the California Public Records Act applies to her. So I took this a step further, and I contacted the California Department of Justice. After all, one could possibly conceive that embezzling money, did Melody do that? Did I say she did that? Or possibly terminating the lives of her clients, which is appears to be the issue with Stevie Price, with Elizabeth Fairbanks, with Lawrence Yetzer ad nauseum. That these might be considered crimes. I mean, I don't know. Do you think these are crimes? They might be crimes. So I contacted the California Department of Justice, and the first response came in from Deputy Attorney General Jonathan Cooper. Cooper represented the state in the first challenge to Melody Scott's license several years ago, unsuccessfully, I would say. And Cooper amazingly wrote me back and said that there was only one complaint ever filed about Melody Scott, and that was filed by Janet Phelan. Well, I have all these other complaints that other individuals filed. So Cooper, shall we say, misstated the facts. So I brought this to his attention, and he backed off a bit and said, I need to do this as a Public Records Act request, because he had no idea. He was just shooting from the hip, right? So at that point, I discovered that California Public Records Act doesn't apply to the Department of Justice either. Actually, by law it does, but they didn't want to reply. So they just didn't. They just didn't. And I pursued this for a number of months. I would call the press office regularly to the point where I was hung up on. They just wouldn't respond. So this new complaint about Melody Scott, which was launched by the Professional Fiduciaries Bureau, which has resulted in the revocation of Melody's license, was apparently revised to include an issue having to do with a special needs trust called the McDonald Special Needs Trust. And according to, this is just so interesting. I've got the complaint here, and this is from the complaint, and this is Melody Scott trying to explain why she never read the Special Needs Trust for 7 years. She administered a trust without reading it. She received fees for her services without obtaining court approval. She exhausted the trust without obtaining court approval. She distributed the remainder of over $15,000 to the beneficiary's mother so the beneficiary's mother could buy a little house. All this stuff. Now, this is of concern, but not as much concern as what she did to Stevie Price, Lawrence Yetzer, Elizabeth Fairbanks, Glenn Neff, and Emily Phelan. So I'm going to read a little bit here from this here because this is fascinating. Melody Scott believes there were mitigating circumstances. She explained she was appointed trustee at the end of 2004, and in 2005, a negative article was published about her in the Los Angeles Times that caused her business to plummet. However, regardless of her financial hardships, her clients never suffered. Her heart and soul are geared toward the care of her clients, and she does not believe she is a threat to the community. She's also been arrested for drunk driving, by the way. Not a threat. So it was really fascinating reading this. She did have a couple of witnesses on her behalf, saying what an excellent role model she was for a fiduciary. That would be Brian Hartnell, attorney Brian Hartnell, who is also discussed in Probate Murders Part 2, and who represented Melody Scott for many, many years. She was also, one of her witnesses was J. David Horspool, attorney at law in Redlands, California, who put his own father under conservatorship, and then apparently in collusion with the guardian, who was a family member, decided that the father shouldn't have his pacemaker battery replaced. It ran out, and J. David Horspool died, and then suddenly his father died. Raymond Horspool died when his pacemaker was allowed to run out, knowing full well that if it ran out, it would cause his death. And then suddenly, J. David Horspool couldn't find the will. Right? So there's been a family lawsuit because apparently the money's disappeared again. His own father. So this is these are the kinds of people who are taking care of older people in California. And one more thing that I did want to say about the California Department of Justice. Not only does it not feel that it needs to abide by its own public records law, um, according to the current Attorney General, Kamala Harris, which is a policy actually that was established by her predecessor, Jerry Brown, now governor of California, they don't take complaints or investigate complaints about guardian abuse, even when the complaint could be considered felony murder. Felony murder is when there is a murder that takes place in the process of another crime, like stealing. Okay, so let's say you have control over someone's medication. You say, oh, they don't need antibiotics. That person dies, and then you take all their money. That could conceivably be felony murder, but it happened under guardianship, and they don't investigate those claims. So when Kamala Harris's office was contacted about this, and so, well, we don't do that. I wanted to know, okay, under what law are you allowed not to do this? Under what is the code that allows you not to investigate criminal complaints that come in about the activity of a guardian? And at that point, the door closed, and nobody in that office will speak to me again. There is no code. So this is the great state of California, who has finally taken away Melody Scott's license to function as a fiduciary. So after all those years of rolling in other people's money, she doesn't have access to other people's money anymore. Is this justice served? What do you think, James?
Well, it sounds to me like it's at least if they weren't going to actually get her on for what she did, they at least got her. They being positive energies got her out of the job. She may not have justice, but at least she's not hurting anybody at this point. So,
well, I've got a question. I've got some questions about this, because there are massive reports coming in from California about other guardians who are really hurting people.
Yeah.
So it doesn't appear to me that the motive here is to stop that guardian from hurting people. I think when Melody said that there was a negative article written about her, and once again, if you Google her, you're going to see a lot of negative articles about her, and that her business began to plummet. I think at that point in time, Melody Scott became a little hot, and she wasn't flying under the radar anymore. She was getting too much attention.
Yeah, she probably was censored not for being a bad guardian, in the sense we're talking about, but in keeping her house in order, so to speak. She was doing dirty deeds, and they were becoming public, and they can't have that as a liability. So it's not that she was doing something wrong; it's that it was becoming visible. That's probably what caused it.
Yeah. Well, let's all have a good stout drink to visibility then. Okay. I want to highly commend other websites that are now that have popped up that are carrying these kinds of stories. Not only the National Association to Stop Guardian Abuse, not only Americans Against Probate Guardianships. There's also Probate Sharks. There's MaryGSykes.com. And there is this new book out published by Michael Larson, Guardianship: How Judges and Lawyers Steal Your Money. And this issue is getting more and more and more attention. Recently, Al Jazeera carried a special on guardian abuse. So it is now entering into the common vernacular, and I think it's high time. So, James?
Yes.
Okay. I do believe that this is my report for tonight. And let me ask you something.
Yeah.
Is Chicago burning?
Burning?
Is Chicago burning?
Uh,
I think that I'm asking you. I think the world is in meltdown,
oh, okay.
and just wanted to ask. You know,
Well, I'm,
everywhere you turn now,
I gotta
that
be,
there's
I gotta be honest. I'm going through what I'm calling a life reboot. I don't know, not to be too dramatic, but one of the things I am doing is not paying attention to the news as much and relying on synchronicity to get information to me. Now, a lot of people would think that's lazy or ill-advised, but one of the things I look at, the things going on in the world right now, would be like if you're on a merry-go-round and you're on a horse looking off at the people are going around you. It's going faster and faster and faster. And the more you try to take in the area around you, not only will it consume your time, but it'll drive you crazy. So I'm kind of like letting go of the world and watching what comes and trusting my instincts and intuition to bring into focus what I need to know when I need to know it, because I can't with the amount of information that's coming out and all the exposés and all the it's mind-boggling. I just can't handle it all, frankly. So that's what I've been doing.
we all have to figure out how to grapple with the world in meltdown, and it sounds like listening to that inner voice is a very important thing to do right now.
It sounds noble, but in my case, I got no choice really. Either go crazy or start focusing on things that may be irrelevant and time wasting, or I'm looking for inner guidance, because I just can't do it. So it's almost like survival as opposed to some kind of higher spiritual advanced good that I'm doing. It's like I'm either going to fall off the merry-go-round, or I'm going to have to allow some spiritual guidance on what to look into. So, and I once again
There's the.
go ahead.
Sorry.
I was wrapping it. So if you got something else to say,
I was just going to say that there is a time for everything, and there's probably a time to slow down and smell the flowers too. So.
yeah. So and so there. I mean, that's why I know what I know, and I don't know what I don't know, and there are gaps in some of the things. Like since I've been listening to Art Bell back in the '90s, when I first got introduced to things like all the alien, either be it aliens, government conspiracies, whatever, all that stuff came out. We're at today. There's like 30 million times more information coming at you, and of course, there's a lot of junk too. And so I'm using that inner filter and guide to get me to where I need to get to when I need to get to it. Otherwise, it's hopeless in my case anyway. So I appreciate the work that you're doing and your guidance and being pretty much like a guard dog on. Once you get to your jowls around a story, you don't let go. And here's a case of. You kept on hounding and harping on, and justly so, on Melody Scott, and it might not be terribly satisfying how she was tossed out, and that she has a lot of karmic debt yet to deal with. But it's good to see that at least she's out of it, and now it's on to the next jerk who's in there, I guess.
Well, the world is a work in progress. So on that note, I will say goodnight, and I'll see you next week.
All righty. We will talk again. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Janet Phelan, live from Mexico.